Season 1 of Medsplaining is brought to you by Estee Lauder. With 40 years of night repair expertise and 30 years of collagen research, Estee Lauder are the experts in nighttime skincare. Before we get into today's topic, make sure to subscribe to the Medsplaining podcast on your favorite podcast platform to never miss an episode. Estee Lauder's Advanced Night Repair Serum, combined with the new Revitalizing Supreme Night Power Bounce Cream, is your nighttime skincare solution. This powerful duo delivers deep renewal and enhances elasticity and bounce. Experience the power of night science. I'm really looking forward to today's guest, but first, let's talk about waking up to our best skin yet. That's possible with Estee Lauder's Advanced Night Repair Serum. Formulated with their exclusive night peptide, it helps ignite 7 powerful skin-renewing actions, fighting the key signs of aging, all while you sleep. Transform your skin overnight with Estee Lauder. So I'm back with my friend Marnie.
Hi.
For anyone who hasn't met her, Marnie's a friend of mine for over 20 years. We met through our husbands, but we've been through a lot together. How's it going?
It's going good. Feeling good.
Good.
Yeah.
Still on hormone therapy.
Still on hormone therapy. Still feeling good.
Yep. Living your best life.
Living my best life.
So now we're going to talk about another subject that literally every single woman that I meet in my practice lists as one of their most significant concerns, which is weight gain, weight redistribution, body image. I certainly know I face those challenges myself. I feel like I work much harder now, sort of to maintain myself. And I do feel it's been like really helpful to focus more on being strong.
Mm-hmm.
But we're up against society.
Right.
We're up against social media, the media, and the pressure.
We're up against J-Lo.
We're up against J-Lo. I admire the fact that J-Lo has a really good work ethic. She works out every day. She clearly she doesn't drink. She doesn't smoke. She takes good care of herself. But she has a chef who literally hands her food. So she doesn't have to think about it. So we can't really be J-Lo unless we have all of J-Lo's assets going for us, right? So you always have to put it in perspective, but that's the problem. That's the problem with social media. And I have 2 daughters, you have a daughter. I worry so much about what they're confronted with every day of their lives in terms of the pressure to be thin or the pressure to adhere to a certain body type. And it may not even be thinness. It might be you don't have the right booty. You don't have the right curves. Now it's like no matter what you are, it seems like there's always someone there to tell you you're not enough, you're too much.
I also feel that sometimes when you get to a certain age, you're just like, I don't give a shit anymore. And you're like, it is what it is. And then you kind of can get to the point where you let yourself go. And you don't take care of your health and your body and stuff because you're just like, it's overwhelming and it's too much and things like that. And I feel like HRT can give you your energy back and help you with that and stuff. And also, the importance of like exercising for not just maintaining your body image, but for your health and taking care of yourself for your health, not your body image.
And I think today's episode is going to be a challenging one for people, but it is so important. And I really wanted from day one of creating this podcast, I wanted to address this issue head on.
It is my least favorite subject when I'm with a group of girlfriends or something.
Oh, yeah.
When they start talking about weight or this or that, like it's when you haven't always had such a healthy relationship with food and working out and body image, it is a hurdle to get over that uncomfortable feeling, no matter what age you are.
Okay, so I have one last question, though. Do you know any women who have a completely healthy relationship and always have?
Not that I know of.
There you go. you're right. It's always there in the back of our mind.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad we could more serious discussion today,
Yes.
but you know what? A really vital one. And
Absolutely. So important.
thank you always for being here
My
as someone
pleasure.
to bounce these ideas and thoughts off of. And I can't wait to see you again next time.
Thank you. Me too.
In today's episode, we dive deep into the topic of eating disorders. Now, we understand that this subject may be triggering for some listeners, so please proceed with caution. Our interview today is intended to offer inspiration, information, and support that could help you or a loved one you know. But if this topic makes you uncomfortable, you may want to consider skipping this episode. My guest today is really a superstar in the world of eating disorder recovery. Like so many women, Kyla Fox developed an unhealthy relationship with food in her late teens and soon found herself in the throes of anorexia and overexercise disorder. She sought treatment many times but found that care was either unavailable or unhelpful. So she did something incredible. She recovered on her own. She then decided to dedicate her life to helping others so they wouldn't struggle as she had. She became a master's level clinical social worker specializing in eating disorders and founded the Kyla Fox Centre, which we'll hear a lot more about today. Please welcome Kyla Fox. Welcome, Kyla Fox, to Medsplaining. I'm so excited to have you here today. You're a dream guest for me, and I'm so excited to tackle this subject, although it is a challenging one. It's a tough one for people to talk about. It's a tough one to acknowledge, but I think we have to tackle things head on to change the narrative. But let's start, though, on a little bit of a lighter note. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your life?
Well, thank you first for having me. I'm so happy to be here too. Well, I'm a mom of 2 girls, 7.5 and 9, which is literally maybe the best thing that ever happened to my life. It makes me emotional. I'm going to cry in 5 seconds already. We just started. So that is an incredible gift for me, especially because of so much that I've been through in my past. I never thought I would have the opportunity to have children. So it's just amazing to raise girls, and I don't just love them, I really like them. I like who they are a lot. I like them a lot. So that's a big part of my life. Yes. I sort of am in a place in my life where I feel like I'm finally who I'm supposed to be. Like sometimes I feel like there's this message that we're supposed to know this so early. And I feel like as I'm now in my 40s, I finally am like, oh yeah, this is Kyla. This is me. Like, she got here. And that's been an unbelievable journey for me to feel good about her.
Let's go back to who Kyla was, because that's obviously such an important part of your journey. Is I don't think maybe you wouldn't be where you were today without what you went through. And it's a challenging story, but do you want to tell us a little bit about your early life?
Yeah.
Maybe some of the things that contributed to the path you ended up on?
I'm an eating disorder therapist, and I'm the founder of the Kyla Fox Centre, which is a private eating disorder recovery center. And I do this work because I struggled, probably for my whole life before I didn't struggle with an eating disorder and disordered eating, but acutely an eating disorder between the ages of about 18 to 23. The eating disorder for me took the shape of really, really heightened restriction and overexercise. And it came to a point in my life where I was really out of control. I had always had a particular direction in my future. I'd always sort of been in the performing arts, and I always was acting when I was a kid and sort of was on that trajectory and had this massive shift in my life.
Yeah. Me too, by the way.
Really?
Yes.
Whoa.
Absolutely. I grew up in a showbiz family, so I completely understand.
Yeah.
And that makes sense then, because the pressure, you have eyes on you.
Yeah, and just like feeling like that was what I was about. That's how people understood me. And then at 18, I decided that wasn't really what I deeply wanted and who I wanted to be. And so I remember coming home from university after a couple of years away, and it sort of became like the precipice for the eating disorder to develop because I felt directionless. I felt deeply out of control. I felt like I had no identity if I didn't have that identity. I was at a time in my life where I felt like I believed at that age that I should know everything, and that everybody else I knew sort of, I suppose, I thought they did. And
Can you imagine at our age now? Thinking that would be possible at that age.
How is it that we're supposed to know those things when we're, heading to university? It's just it's such a hard thing. And so that was the catalyst to bring these symptoms of exercising. And I remember saying to myself when I was taking a plane home, I remember saying, I'm just going to exercise a little bit more because I think it just might help me with this stress that I feel about not knowing what to do with myself. And I have the time now.
Sure.
So it became this sort of like seemingly innocent experience that was supported by people because I think that's what we do. We support people to move their bodies.
Absolutely.
And it just took
it's
over
not
me.
it's not that there's an inherent problem with that.
No.
Right. It's just you never know.
When it can.
You just have the right constellation of factors. Did you feel external pressures or was it all internal for you?
I think it was always both. I think that internally I was really lost. Externally, I felt like that might have been what my value was. And holding on to that or trying to make that better was really an intention for me. And so I just started to exercise a whole bunch more. And then that kind of like, spun into restricting certain foods, certain categories of food, certain amounts of foods. And then the next thing I knew, I would say 4 to 6 months later, I was like full-blown anorexia, which was pretty devastating for everybody around me. And in truth, I think there was a lot of denial. And I too was in denial. I think I didn't really understand what was happening to me. And I don't think that my parents really understood what was happening to me. And at the time, which is, 25 years ago now, there wasn't really access to care. I had to wait on a wait list for like 10 months. I probably would have died if I had to do that.
And how did you finally, because I feel like it's really hard you can't get someone to help themselves when they're in that situation. Mm-hmm. What finally prompted you to agree to get help?
I feel like I had this, I call it a gift. It was terrifying at the time, but one of the things that happened to me was I had so many physiological ramifications because of the acute exercise and starvation. And so my electrolytes were constantly out of whack. I was hypoglycemic all the time. I was fainting and all kinds of things were happening to me that actually were so frightening. And I had this one experience in the car with my mom. We were like driving the 401 West. It was like bumper to bumper, 4:00 in the afternoon. And I started to feel like my legs were going numb. My vision was blurry. My hearing started to like block out. I was feeling like so much pressure in my chest. I felt like I was maybe going to die. I don't know if it was a panic attack or what it was. I don't know what it was, but I ended up in the hospital. I don't know how I got there. Like I fainted in the car and then I was in the hospital. And so I think it was that moment of realization. I remember looking at my mother while this was happening to me. And in that moment, she was so terrified and she was like screaming and crying. And I realized in that moment that this was so much bigger than me. Oh. And I had to do something about that.
Before we go forward with your story,
yeah.
I do think it's really important for people who are not experiencing a full-blown eating disorder to understand what your mentality was. What would a typical day be like for you when you were at the height of your disorder? And then what were the internal voices telling you about how, because obviously you were probably feeling a certain way in your body.
Sure.
But that wasn't enough.
Yeah, I think what's important to remember, whether you would be classified as having an eating disorder or disordered eating, or you're somewhere in the spectrum, and sometimes the labels are irrelevant. It's really just about the preoccupation and intrusion of thoughts around rituals and rules that you are governed to follow, to the point where I think initially they start off quite innocently. And then eventually they just overtake you, where you can't live in your life without doing those things. And by those things, it could be like, you can only eat this at this time, or you're not hungry, so we don't need food, or eat that whole thing because you started eating it already, or make sure that you rid yourself of the food because that was bad what you did, or
Right.
things beyond food, like
Yeah.
you're a bad person, or you're never going to amount to anything. Or look at the way that you look. How can you look like that? Or look at so-and-so. They're doing so much. You're nothing. Or it almost, I feel like, is this endless noise of badgering and belittling and harming and insulting. It's like being in the most abusive relationship that you could ever be in your mind.
And obviously, your parents noticed.
Yes.
They worried about you.
Yes.
What would they say to you? And then what would the impact be on you? So how would you then spin that? How would the abuser in your brain spin that?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like, yes, they did notice. Yes, they were terrified. And at the same time, I feel like also trying to help me to feel like it was okay and I could get through it, and I just needed to like eat more or stop doing this, or,
Right.
would try to interfere with breaking some of those rules, but I wasn't allowed to break the rules. Like, that's what I think people don't understand when you have a serious mental health issue, that you can't break the rules of an eating disorder. It won't let you, because if you have to, then you will be, the backlash is unbearable and the compensation is unbearable. So I think there was a lot of like, don't worry, you can just try this, or, maybe you should go out and do this thing instead. And none of that was possible. I was like literally in gridlock. It's like being in a prison in your mind.
And how did it feel for you because I really want to get to the root of this. Like, how would it feel for you then if you went to bed at night knowing you'd followed all the rules that day?
Winner. Like best day ever. Like I did it. And then what ends up happening if you have an eating disorder or disordered eating is that the rules change. And so the rules that I would have had, let's say, one day, the next week they would up the ante. And then the ante just keeps getting upped. So if I had to do A, B, and C, the next week it was A, B, C, and D.
Right.
And then it was E. And then we're like at Z. And there's so many rules that keep building and building and building. So you never actually can get ahead. You're always losing your power.
It's so important to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
We can't put ourselves into the mind of someone who's struggling with this, but you have to be able to put yourself into the mind of someone who's struggling with this in order to be able to help them.
I think so, absolutely.
So you end up in the hospital.
So I ended up in the hospital and I was discharged. They didn't admit me. I suppose everything checked out fine. And they told me that I could, go on a wait list for an inpatient program that I would probably wait about 6 to 8 months for. I didn't have 6 to 8 months, obviously.
So they didn't admit you because you weren't, sick enough?
Yeah, I suppose it was like I guess my vitals checked out and I was quote unquote stable, and they probably told me to eat a bit more, and I told them I would. And then I left, and that was kind of that. And they put a referral in for me, and it was just sort of left up to us, myself and my parents and my sibs, to figure it out. And I think at that point, I also was in denial and didn't think I needed a hospital program anyway. So even if they tried to admit me, I was an adult at that point, I don't even think I would do it. I mean, I'm not even sure I would, to be honest.
Were you scared? Were you scared at the prospect of being forced
Yeah,
to break your own rules?
I don't even think, it's so interesting to consider it, because I almost don't even think I was even aware of what was happening. Like, I was so disconnected from my reality that I almost don't even know if I even thought that would happen or what that even meant. Truly, I don't even think I thought I had an eating disorder. It wasn't even until so far into my recovery where I was like, holy, I have had the wickedest eating disorder. It took so long for me to give myself permission to admit that I did.
And so then you're on this odyssey of trying to recover. What was the point that you think was the decision to recover?
I think it was probably a process. I don't know if I definitively ever decided I'm ready. I think I was scared I was going to die. I think I was scared of all those physiological things that were happening for me. I've always been like a very strong-minded person, and I've always had a ton of ambition, and I've been future focused. And I think those things propelled me to know that like this was not going to be my destiny. Like I was going to move past this.
Did you know what your goal was? Did you know, I mean, in terms of what your destiny was going to be at that time, did you have a picture of what you thought it might be?
No, because the direction that I was supposed to go into was tarnished. I just knew that I was more than that. I knew that that wasn't what it was going to be for me.
Okay.
And I suppose on some level, even though I think when people have eating disorders, it's really so much about self-worth or the lack thereof. I suppose there was some place in me that had a sense of worth, and I was fighting for that. So I feel like my parents kind of, just planned to refeed me. Like I don't even think we knew what we were doing because we had no direction, we had no guidance.
Right.
But they just sort of refed me, and I complied because I was scared of what was going to happen to me. And I was scared of, we had the ambulance at my house all the time. I was like, there were so many things that were going on, and I just so desperately wanted to feel better and feel safe in my body, and I didn't. And so I would eat, and I was compliant, but it wasn't, sometimes when I talk about it, I never like to paint the picture that like that's easy. It was impossible, and I was debilitated by the stress of that and the backlash of that and the fear of what was happening to my body and the fact that I was I just felt so out of control. And for me, it shifted. During that sort of refeeding experience, I really shifted a lot into binging and purging. It became like really messy and incredibly out of control. And that part of that part of my suffering, was always really under wraps because it felt so much more shameful. And it was just like years of struggling and transitioning through symptoms and trying to get my feet on the ground and making headway in different ways, trying to maybe enroll back in school. Like it was many years of feeling very lost.
So you go through this, you're kind of recovering basically on your own. At what point did you decide that you were going to turn this into a mission for yourself to help others?
I enrolled back in university at U of T, and I had this professor. It's really interesting in my recovery because I actually feel like so many women came into my life during that time that were incredibly maternal to me. And I really felt like that was a thing in my life that I needed very badly and had always longed for in certain ways. I have my own mom, and we have a very beautiful relationship now, but it wasn't always such. I had this professor. She was much older, and she was so wise. And it was this random course in it's now gender studies, but it was women's studies at the time. That's me dating myself a bit.
Yeah.
She was so brilliant, and for whatever reason, she took me under her wing. And she became this unbelievable mentor to me. And she sort of like carved a path for my education. And I told her that, and I was sort of like in the heap of my recovery when I met her, but I kind of would take courses with her thereafter. But she helped me to define how I could be the therapist that I wanted to be, because while I was doing this, I was like, I understand this. Like I need to work with people who are going through this. This is what I want to do. This is the meaningfulness that I want to have in my life. And so she helped me to sort of design how I could do it in a way that would be in line with who I am. And so that kind of became a very powerful purpose. And I was getting well because I was going to do something in my life. I had direction. I had clarity. And I think that's always been what's important about me is like I want more. I just want more. I want to do more. I think out of the box, and I think that people along the way helped me to like really supported that for me.
Right. And obviously there's a huge need.
Yeah.
Huge need. And your eyes certainly must have been opened to the fact that there was a need for something different out there, for an option that could meet people where they're at, to really help people. Do you remember your very first patient, your very first client?
I actually do.
How did that feel?
I think probably very surreal. She was an adolescent girl, and I was, I probably was 25 or something at the time.
Yeah.
And I remember what it meant to me that I was helping her and that she wanted to keep coming back and that she had been to so many different therapists and never really felt like anyone understood her. And she worked with me for many, many years, and now she has a really beautiful life, which is amazing. But I remember feeling very, like, I don't know, I can't explain it, and I'm sure you feel this way with your patients, but I feel this unbelievable privilege to know people, like really know people. You know, like I feel like in the world, you know, there's so much protection and people are walking around in costumes and we're all trying to like, you know, guard ourselves, that there isn't like a lot of space where people can just be honest and be really, really vulnerable. And I have this incredible privilege in my work where people do that with me like all the time. It's incredible.
And I think that the part of that is letting them know you a little bit too.
Yeah.
I remember having a lot of instructors throughout my education, my medical education, saying, you know, don't talk about yourself. Don't let them know anything about yourself. You are a brick wall. I just couldn't. I felt like I was always like letting it slip.
Yeah.
Little things about me, or letting them know that I could relate.
Yes.
Or letting them know I was a mom, so I understood where their hesitancy might come from with their child having to be on a medication or something, right? But I feel like that's the magic.
I do too.
That's where you connect with people. That's where they know. For example, you knew right away the therapists you saw weren't the right one.
Yeah, I think that the feedback that I've always gotten is that there's like a human experience that I think people feel in my care or in the care of my team because we are people first with people. But I share with people because I'm a person with them.
And of course, that's up to the practitioner. I'm not telling everybody they have to share elements of themselves, but I think just showing that you're a human being,
yes,
who can relate. I love your mission statement. I'm going to read it because I want to get it exactly right. But to get loud about changing the way we understand eating disorders in our culture.
Yeah.
This is a big ask, right? Was that something that was going through your mind at that time? Is that like...
I think that people really misunderstand eating disorders, like not only in terms of how they're thought about, like categorically speaking, people think about anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder.
Right.
But I think about binging, purging, and restricting because really the truth is that most people impacted by disordered eating or eating disorders are not nicely fitting into those boxes. They're like eating disorder behavior is fluid and it's forever changing. And it is about binging, purging, and restricting, however it may look for somebody.
And let's just quickly take a step into like just basic facts. Can you explain what the difference is between anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, overexercise disorder, and binging and purging?
Well, I think, you know, typically the way that they're understood is that anorexia is really about restrictive food patterns. So not eating enough, generally being underweight as a result, tons and tons of rules and rituals around what you can't eat, when you can eat, all those sorts of things. But it generally shows itself in a way too thin or thin aesthetic, and it's about restriction and restriction of food. Now, a lot of people are actively engaged in restriction, but don't necessarily maybe have the prototype physically that would identify them as being a person impacted by anorexia. And this is where things become complicated because then they won't necessarily get, you know, maybe taken as seriously for how much they're suffering, despite the fact that they may be in severe restriction. And just because their body doesn't show it that way, their care may be overlooked. And that's why I feel like that box, as an example, isn't always a helpful way to think about eating disorders. Now they call it atypical anorexia.
Right.
But I think the title in and of itself is not what's important. It's really just what's happening to a person that matters. Okay. Similarly with like bulimia, which is really more about episodes of, you know, typically binging and purging. But what binging means to somebody is so vast. And what purging can look like for someone is also so vast. Like I think stereotypically we might think of someone excessively eating in terms of binge, and we might think of someone throwing up in terms of purge. But there are so many ways that can look. You know, some people feel like they're binging, but they might actually be eating what we would consider to be a really normal sized meal, but it feels very out of control for them. And that might feel like a binge for them. And someone may be exercising excessively, and that's the way that they rid themselves calorically. So they're not necessarily vomiting, but they're very, very actively purging.
Right.
And so if we just look at what these ideas are instead of these categories of eating disorders, then we open up space for really everybody who suffers.
And so you talked about movement. Movement's important. Exercise is important. You and I are we both exercise because it's a vital part of our life.
Yes.
Where would you say the difference is between someone who exercises regularly and someone who overexercises?
It's a great question. And I think it's always this blurry line because I feel like, again, if we go back to this idea where eating disorders are really about pervasive rules and rituals, that means that perhaps that exercise experience can never not be had.
Okay.
That person can never be flexible with it. There is so much guilt and shame and discomfort if they can't do it. It always maybe has to be done in a certain way or for a certain amount, or the ante gets upped.
Okay.
Or there's just like, you know, if they can't do it, then maybe they won't eat a certain way, or they might not, you know, there's sort of all the layers that will come with it. And I think there's a spectrum and degrees of which that can affect people, because even people who don't typically have an eating disorder or aren't defined that way, they might not go to the gym that morning and feel really bad about that too.
Right.
So it's, again, the degree in which that rule takes over your life,
Okay.
and then what you have to do about that or not.
Tell me about the birth of the Kyla Fox Centre.
So I was, when I graduated from school, then I opened up a private practice. That was sort of what I did on the side of my real job, if you will. And when I was working with people, I found that I was like, you know, they would come in and they would need someone not only to be their therapist, which is what I was, but they would also need to, I would book them around a lunchtime because they needed support to eat their lunch at that time. And so I would be like, why don't you just bring your lunch in and we'll do our session over lunch. And that way you have accountability to the meal and some structure. And so like these kinds of things were happening all the time. And then I would maybe need to send them out to, I don't know, a dietitian. Even though I knew that work, it's not my specialty. So I would send them out. And that they would go and then maybe they come back and say like that person didn't understand eating disorders, or I just got really mixed messaging. And so I started to just get, you know, thinking all the time about how much more people needed, how much more my clients needed, and how important it would be for them to have really comprehensive care from a multidisciplinary team, from people who really understood eating
And lunch,
disorders.
you can only have lunch hour.
Yeah, exactly.
So many hours of the day.
Exactly.
Bring your lunch at 8 p.m.
Yeah, be like, we'll do snack. Okay, we'll do lunch. Okay, we'll do dinner. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you started building a team around
So
you.
I started building a team. Well, you know, I had this thought of this center. You know, I didn't know what it was going to be, but I had a vision of it in my mind. I used to talk about it. And then I just got really tired of talking about it. So I said to my family, I was like, by the time this was on my 30th birthday, I said, by the time I'm 31, I'm going to have a center. And I don't know what it will be, and maybe it will be nothing, but I'm just going to stop talking about it. And so then I found this space, and I knew other people that were in different parts of the work. And so I asked them if they wanted to join the team. And at the worst, I just thought I would be paying an absorbent amount of rent in this massive space and just have my private practice out of there. But that was the worst case scenario.
Right.
And so here we are, you know, more than 13 years later, and it's just sort of really taken on a new life and evolved into being, you know, a very comprehensive outpatient treatment center.
Yeah, and I want to talk specifically about your approach, because when you and I have talked about patients, you know, their fear, oftentimes what holds them back is they are afraid of being institutionalized.
Yeah.
They might be flirting with the idea of getting some help, but they are terrified of being, force fed, of being pinned down, of having to leave their life to get treatment. Tell us about your approach, because I find it's so inspiring. It's so perfect for what we need.
I feel like one of the things we can never forget is that food and life go hand in hand. You don't have the privilege within life to not eat. You have to eat to live.
Right.
So different than if you have an addiction, you can live without using. You can't do that with food. So life and food are interacting all the time. And it's my feeling that if we remove someone from life and we try to rehabilitate their relationship with food, that's not real life, because then they go back into real life and they haven't been equipped with what to do with food in their lives. And it's their lives that trigger them. So that idea has always led me to think we need to treat people while they're in their life. That being if people are medically stable to do so. But if people are in their life while they're in recovery, then we have this incredible ability to be able to help them to feel fulfillment. Like they don't have to leave their job, which is meaningful for them, or they have to pay the bill. We don't have to make sure that they have an excessive amount of childcare. They can actually be in their life, and now we're fully virtual, pop up on screen, have their lunch support, go back to work, pop up on screen, have their therapy appointment. It also means that like parents who are in meetings at work or could never get to the center can now just pop up on the screen and make sure that they attend family therapy.
Yeah.
It's created such an opportunity for people to see that recovery is actually in their life and life is in recovery. So the success and longevity of their recovery has been instrumental. In addition, another thing that I think is so interesting is it's such a big ask to tell people to come to a place and be vulnerable with you. Like I used to remember when the center was brick and mortar and people would come in, there was so much fear around like who they might see or what those people might look like or what they would think that they looked like. And even coming into our offices, and then I would be asking them to be vulnerable.
Right.
So now that they're on the screen and they're in their space and we can literally see like their kitchen, we can see their pantry, we can watch them cook, we can essentially give them access to how to be successful in their lives. They can be differently vulnerable because they feel differently comfortable. So it's just been like a beautiful way, I feel, that people don't have to feel like they have to give up their life for a certain amount of time. They don't have to submit to being force-fed or, governed by the number on the scale, but that they can actually sustain their life and make change at the same time.
How crucial is it, in your opinion, for families to be involved?
Critical. Like, I actually feel that those that have support of loved ones move through recovery so much more successfully than those that don't. Now, let me say this, that not everybody has the support of loved ones. So I don't want to say that to make people feel like if they don't, that they can't recover. But I do really feel like it takes everybody's participation to really help a person who's struggling realize that like they're not the problem exclusively. And they're not the only person that needs to change. Because eating disorders live in life and the way that we feel about ourselves and relationships and dynamics, everybody around us is a part of that. And so if everybody can contribute to understanding this at a bigger level, then I think there's so much more power in helping that person move away from harming themselves with food.
And you're talking a lot about, and it's true, food and life go hand in hand, and we can't avoid food. And that reminds me of, situations in life where potential triggers might lie. So talk about vacation, weddings, holiday season. Do you feel like these are particular times where patients need additional support?
Yeah, I think that what they do is they sort of shift the rhythm of people's lives. They're obviously less structured. There's more people around. There's different foods perhaps or more foods. There's different family dynamics. There's so many things that come with these times of life. And one of the things we have to do is help people be prepared for them differently. and give space for people to be able to know what they can handle and why or why not.
Right.
And if everybody is a part of those kinds of conversations, and I think we can set people up during those really important and meaningful times in life to actually feel like they can participate and participate successfully, so that when those holidays end, it doesn't mean that someone is like even more exacerbated in their eating disorder and heightened in their symptoms, but rather that like they have actually moved through those holidays quite regulated, quite safely.
Mm-hmm. So you have specific advice and specific recommendations that you would make ahead of time for people to navigate those.
Sometimes I think there's this idea that like, when it's a holiday that like we're all going to just eat more and it's going to, we have all these ideas about that.
Yeah.
And I think what we try to tell people is like, I know it may be like whether it's a Tuesday night or a Saturday night or, a birthday celebration or whatever it is, that like food can be regulated. It doesn't have to change everything.
Okay.
Sometimes I feel like there's this mentality of like restrict. And then on these experiences, it's like, permission to binge, and then you'll compensate after. And I think we actually need to change that thinking.
That is so true. That is so pervasive for so many people in society.
Yes.
Like the number of patients who will say to me, I don't want to do my blood work in January. Because the holidays,
right?
And it's like, what are you doing on the holidays?
Yes, exactly.
Right? Like it shouldn't be that different.
It shouldn't be that different.
Or maybe you're having a piece of pie or something.
Yes.
You know what I mean? But really, you're right. It's this idea that everything goes out the window.
Yes.
Right. And maybe that's just part of the problem with our culture.
I think it is a cultural piece.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like it's sort of, setting a new tone for, regular day-to-day life versus a holiday. It's similar to like Monday 9 to 5 versus the weekend. We don't have to shift gears so much, but there's this mentality that you do. And so I think part of being in a normalized relationship with food is recognizing that, every day is a day and food doesn't have to be right at the forefront. It's like it's a part of life, but it's not right at the top.
Right. So obviously the things we've been talking about up till now have been things I'm sure have been pretty consistent throughout your 13, 14 years of doing this. But something that has emerged through your career has been social media.
Yeah.
TikTok, diet culture of TikTok specifically. Have you noticed a change in terms of, what your clients are exposed to and anything different about either the frequency, the severity, I guess just the approach to eating disorders in the modern age?
Well, I mean, there's no question that social media is so impactful, especially for young people. Like I'm thinking about the 10 years that I practiced before I opened the center and then the 13 years that the center's been around, like such a significant shift culturally in terms of the impact of social media. And I feel like probably why COVID was so detrimental and why it led to such an uprise of people developing eating disorders, because the messaging on social media and the pressure and the exposure and the lack of privacy and, the messaging around who you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to look like and what you're supposed to eat and how it's just so pervasive.
Right. And so much of it isn't real.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Has there been a change in the age range of people that you're seeing? Like, do you feel it's primarily affecting adolescents, teenagers?
No, interestingly enough, I mean, I feel like that's always been a primary population, right? And I feel like, in reference to even the work that you do, stage and age of life, I think is critical because the changing body is inevitable, especially during particular stages of life. And so puberty being one of them, pregnancy being another one, menopause being a massive population that is impacted by eating disorders and disordered eating.
So we do an intake questionnaire, and every single woman I talk to, with very few exceptions, has weight as one of their number one concerns.
Yeah. I feel that at the center, we have had such an influx of women moving through menopause more than ever before. And likely because of all of these external pressures and exposure, in addition to the pressure of what it means that your body is changing, and our inability to accept that and
And a
talk
lack
about that.
of being prepared to know what to do,
Yes.
to maybe keep yourself strong and healthy through menopause. We're not
Yes.
told it's like only after the fact that somebody finds out what maybe would have been beneficial for them
Yes.
to be doing for the last 30 years.
Yes.
You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I feel like those ages and stages of life that women move through in particular are really triggering for eating disorders and disordered eating.
Are you seeing more women in perimenopause and menopause
Yes,
now?
more than ever before.
Did a lot of them have?
Eating disorders when they were younger? Many.
Yeah.
I think there's this normalization of like, you know, people just being on a diet or like dieting throughout their life or never having like an eating disorder, quote unquote, but never being satisfied with themselves and never feeling comfortable. And so like trying different things with food or like losing weight and gaining weight. And I think we underestimate that is eating disordered. We don't realize that, but like that's still endless preoccupation with your physical appearance and the impact that it has on your emotional well-being and connection and relationships, all the things.
Yes.
And so menopause is often people will talk about like, you know, before I used to just be able to like be in my phase of this diet and the weight would come off and now I can't do that anymore. You know, all those kinds of things.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about parents in this, you know, parents of teenagers, parents of adolescents. What are some red flags? What are some signs that loved ones can look for that might indicate that their child is struggling?
So many potential flags are also really normalized behaviors. And that's why eating disorders are so tricky. Because if your kid decides that they want to get quote unquote more fit, there's something maybe important about that, or parents often support that. But at the same time, it's when do those behaviors become rules and rituals that your child cannot break out of? And suddenly they take over their ability to be free and open. So I think some of it is recognizing the ways that, you know, a lot of really normalized behaviors are also eating disorder behaviors or potentially could become them. And I think that's, I mean, I don't say that to scare people, but that's really, I think, where parents often might not see it happening. So I think, of course, there's food and body stuff. Like we could see the ways that maybe your kids might be hiding food, sneaking food. Maybe you would actually find remnants of, you know, vomiting or things like that, or noticing that your kids are skipping meals, or suddenly they're not interested in eating, you know, quote unquote junk food, or right, like there could be things that are developing and they might be masked as like, I'm trying to take care of myself differently, or I think those things can exist. I think obviously changes to the body can exist. But I also feel that if we move away from food and the body and think bigger about what eating disorders are, then we really do need to tap into the emotional well-being of our kids and recognizing the ways that they're not maybe doing well mentally and emotionally that then shows up in food in the body.
Got it.
So that's like where it starts first.
Right.
And then the symptoms with food will show up. So it could be things socially, relationships shifting and ending, bullying, substance use, experimenting with things, not doing well in school. Like it could be anything.
Right.
And I think sometimes it's hard to know what's going on with your kids, especially during adolescence when they want to be private and individuate and have autonomy. So I think the work for parents is around like how can we create safe spaces for our kids to tell us what's happening for them? How can we welcome them to share with us?
And I think what, you know, the key thing too is what you're saying is that because it's really above the neck, this is an above the neck issue. It's recognizing when your child is becoming more rigid, inflexible, the control, that they're seeing this as a form of control. So it's like, let's go out for dinner tonight. No, I have to exercise.
Yeah.
Right? If we don't recognize the signs, we're not going to be able to help. And then the other thing, I want to ask you the opposite sort of end of that spectrum. For parents who are worried that their child is overweight, how do you help without harming?
it's a really important piece because I do think that most people think that eating disorders show themselves in restriction or ridding yourself of calories, but actually more commonly, eating disorders are about overeating and excessive eating and being out of control with food. And so I think that that can obviously result in being in a bigger body. Not obviously everybody who is in a bigger body is overeating, but that is a very common presentation for people with eating disorders, is binge eating or hiding food. And so I think if you have a child that is overweight, I think first we have to ask ourselves, like, what does that mean for you? What is your own feeling about that? What is your worry about that? What is the messaging you're giving your kid about that? How are you talking about those things? And what is it that's happening with them emotionally, psychologically? And what is the relationship that they have with food? Do you know about those things? How does your family relate around food? I think that the way that we are as parents with food in our body and the messaging that we give is so critical in how our kids understand themselves or their own bodies or their relationship with food. But I think that it's really important to know, like, a lot of people have a lot of really strong ideologies around health and wellness and what to eat and what not to eat, and you got to have this or you can't have that, or you know, all those things that we do, and I think we can't underestimate how impactful that is. So
Right.
an enormous amount of symptoms for people is hiding food, sneaking food, feeling afraid to talk about food, spending money on food. You know, that's something that we also really need to be talking about as well.
Right.
And the same rules apply. Like, it's an emotional thing. It's like eating to soothe, eating to numb out,
Right.
eating to go away from life, eating because there's like pain, hurt, discomfort. It's exactly the same as the child who's not doing the eating. The same reasons exist. It's just a different presentation with the food.
How can a parent be helpful in that situation? So they realize that they recognize their own patterns, their own behaviors. How many parents are talking about their next diet in front of their children or obsessing about their own body? How do you know when to intervene?
Parents ask me this all the time. And it's a
tough
tricky one, right?
Yeah.
I feel like, and maybe it's just because I feel like honesty is so critical just in general, that I feel that I know one of the things that we see a lot with families is that communication is really challenging. There isn't even a lot of it, or maybe there's like communication's really conflictual. And so like that's a big piece of the treatment that we help families with, and really supporting like, you know, different means of communication. But I really feel that if you're worried about your child, like, crawl into bed with them and tell them, like, in a really loving way. And if you don't have that relationship with your child where you can do that, then I think it's so possible. I mean, we work with parents all the time whose kids like don't want to come to treatment, or they haven't even addressed it with their kid yet because they're so afraid. We work with parents and families all the time to really help them so that they can inevitably address things with their kids. So I feel like it's coming from a really like tender and compassionate and loving place to say, like, I'm worried about you and I love you so much and I see this. What does it mean?
And make it about their pain.
Yeah. And like, what are you going through? What's happening to you? And I think that we need to do this as parents, like, always. Not even just because we might notice something, but just like crawl into bed with your kid and say, like, what's going on with you? How are your friends? How are you feeling about things? Do you like yourself? You know, I mean, I try to ask my kids those questions all the time.
So if you could like wave your magic wand and have families, every family everywhere, have a really healthy relationship with food from the get-go, what would that look like? What would a household's relationship with food look like?
That it would have all the foods. Nothing would be bad or good. It would just be there. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's boundaryless.
Right.
But that there's no like foods that are bad and out of the house. Because I think then kids go for that. when they can't have something, they want it.
Yes.
I think families would eat meals together
Mm-hmm.
often, really often, which like I know is so impossible also. But yeah, like I think it's so important for families to come together because families can rarely come together
Yeah.
without distraction. And there's something beautiful about coming together because I think it also shows that food is not just about the eating, it's about connection. And it's about togetherness and it's about tradition.
It's funny because I remember when my kids were little and I would struggle to get them to eat certain vegetables or whatever. And my pediatrician said, just keep putting it on the table.
Just keep putting it on the table.
Just keep putting it. And I was like, that's never going to work. And then one day they go for that piece of broccoli and they
Yes.
decide they really like it.
I think it's true. I think it's true because like we want to model what we're hoping for and like creating ease around meal times. Like, so it's not stressful and it's just like nice to come together. So I feel like that is a big deal.
I love that. I love that it's not about foods being good or bad.
No, it's just food. And it does different things for us. And we could probably, if we're connected to ourselves, we could learn about that.
Right. Like, how do you feel when you eat
Yeah. So and so.
such and such versus
Yeah.
such and such?
Yeah.
And a little bit of such and such is great.
Yes.
But when you eat too much of it, you're going to get a tummy ache or whatever. You know what I
you're
mean?
gonna feel
Like
tired or
or
things
you're
like
tired,
that.
right? You just
Yeah.
don't have the energy. So I
Yeah.
think that's great. And I just wish diet culture would just go away.
Oh,
I mean, the concept of I'm going to do this for 3 months and then I'm going to go back to the way I was. But we're never addressing the root of the relationship
with food.
with food.
Yeah. And then it ends up, I think people just develop this failure complex with food in their body because they can't get ahead of why that pattern keeps coming back or they keep getting further and further away from the body that they really, maybe could be in or desire to be in or whatever it is, like that it's just chasing this fantasy all the time instead of really learning how to be with who you are and take care of yourself and really appreciate your body and feel regulated with food.
I know something that you've really prioritized as part of your own recovery and your self-care is your yoga practice.
Yeah.
And I, as someone who follows you online and fangirls a little bit about you, I'm just blown away by not only your practice itself, but your dedication to its practice. When did you discover yoga and what has that meant to you in terms of your own healing?
Yoga was a fundamental part of my recovery. So my brother picked me up out of my bed one day and took me to this yoga class when I was so ill in my eating disorder. And I was so depressed and I was so dark. And he used to go to this place in Toronto that no longer exists, very sadly. But I remember walking into this space and I was blown away by just the people that were there and the community. And I remember everybody getting on their mats and moving through this movement. And I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, but it was very moving to me. And I felt something about it. And I kept going back. And then I started to, know familiar faces. And then it sort of became a safe place for me. And so the long of the short is that I started my yoga practice 25 years ago there. And I built a second safe home for myself in that environment. Yoga to me, though, and this is, I think, what's important, because I think when people think about eating disorders or exercise, they also think about people doing yoga to be thin or fit. That is not what it is for me. I feel like yoga is I don't go to synagogue as a Jewish person. I never really went to synagogue, but for me, it's like synagogue, or it's like going to church or something.
Yeah.
It's a religious practice. It's
It's spiritual.
It's spiritual.
Yeah.
It feeds my soul. There's something that happens to me when I get on the mat and I breathe and I move. And yes, I can do really great things with my body in terms of postures and stuff, and my practice is advanced. But that's just a piece of it. What happens to me in my mind, and I have this time with myself, and it's so centering and grounding. I would never be me without yoga. It's that much a part of me. It's a huge part of who I am.
That's amazing. I did yoga for many, many years at a studio. Now I just do a little bit at home. But one of the things I remember is one of the first studios I went to, it had no mirror. And that, I think, you don't always have a choice. But I was like, how can there be no mirror? Aren't we going to be checking to make sure we look okay in the bathroom?
Yeah.
No, it was going inside your body.
Yeah.
You know, and it was amazing to me. I got out of my head and into my body. And you're right. It was just a way to, who cares what you look like?
Yes.
How do you
that studio
feel?
never had mirrors.
How do you feel? If you had 5 tips for people identifying or addressing eating disorders, what would they be?
The first thing would maybe be, how does somebody feel about themselves in terms of like their sense of worth, self-acceptance, confidence? I feel like if we want to build a safe relationship with food in our body, we have to build a safe relationship with ourselves. So do you have relationships that help you grow and support you? Do you feel safe in your life? Do you feel safe in the decisions that you've made? Are you in environments that really support who you are as a person? I know I'm maybe not giving you a tip, but
oh no,
I'm
these
just
are
like,
though. These
I
are
feel
these
like
are
it's
things that I guess that's what I meant. Like, what are the things we want to instill? What are the things we want to do to ensure that our children will be less likely to develop an eating disorder?
I feel like one of the things is that, you know, life is very unpredictable. There's nothing that we can do to guarantee stability and predictability. But to our ability, I think it's an unbelievable gift to give children stability and predictability. And that could just mean like, we wake up at this time, your lunch is packed the night before and it's in your bag, and we walk to school at this time, and then you have, you know, and then I will be there at pickup, or somebody will, and you'll come home and our family will eat dinner at this time, and then you'll go to soccer or whatever it is.
Yes.
But like, and bedtime happens and you brush your teeth and you put on your pajamas or whatever. I feel like structure and predictability, and granted, I suppose I'm speaking to younger kids because I have younger-ish kids, but I feel like there is so much safety that develops for kids around predictability and order. And that doesn't mean being super rigid all the time, but I think just like having a sense of how the day flows, how the world operates, and like that they're aware of what to expect. I also feel that sometimes as parents, I think we do too much. Like, I feel like our children need to have that important sense of independence and the ability to know that they are actually able to do things. Like, they can do something and maybe get an allowance, or they can totally make their bed in the morning, or they can drive themselves somewhere and make sure that they get home on time. Like, I think that we sometimes interfere too much and take over and do for them and take away their sense of confidence and independent building.
I can't even begin to tell you how much I appreciate our conversation today. I know that there are people listening and watching right now who are worried about a child or about to have a child, or not sure how to raise that subject at all with their children. And you've given us so much truly valuable and concise advice. If just one person crawls into their kid's bed tonight and tells them, I'm worried about you, tell me what's going on with you, let's talk about it, we'll have done so much good here today. I appreciate that you share your personal journey. We're not just therapists. We're not just practitioners. We're humans. Most of us are doing this because we've lived through something. And so I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. This means so much to me. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, I feel so much about you and who you are and what you do. And so it has just been my pleasure. I feel so grateful to be here.
Thanks for being on Medsplaining.
Yay!
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok at Medsplaining. If you have any questions, shoot me a DM. And if you like this episode, the best thing you can do is tell a friend or rate and review it wherever you listen to your podcast so other women can discover it. And don't forget, if you're listening to this, you may be happy to know that we video every single episode, so you can watch it if you prefer on YouTube. See you next week. Medsplaining is produced by Ghost Bureau. Thank you for tuning in to Medsplaining. While we strive to provide accurate and insightful information, this podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The opinions expressed by our host and guests are their own and should not be interpreted as medical advice. Every individual's health situation is unique, and it is crucial to consult with a qualified healthcare provider regarding your specific concerns and conditions. Additionally, any links, resources, or references mentioned in our episodes are provided for informational purposes only and are not sponsored by Medsplaining. The producers and hosts of Medsplaining assume no responsibility or liability for any actions taken as a result of listening to our podcast. We encourage you to use the information presented here as a starting point for discussions with your healthcare provider. Information and references are subject to change based on scientific evidence as it evolves over time. The hosts and producers of Medsplaining are not responsible for future changes to the information and references and assume no obligation to update based on future developments. Remember, your health and well-being are paramount. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to exploring more topics in women's health with you in future episodes.